This is Presidential Candidate Dion D. Jenkins coming to you today with another speech commentary essay entitled The Tragedy of Clarence Thomas. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and press the notification bell. Quote, when informed by the FBI agent of the nature of the allegations and the person making them, I was shocked, surprised, hurt, and enormously saddened. I have not been the same since that day. For almost a decade, my responsibilities included enforcing the rights of victims of sexual harassment as a boss, as a friend, and as a human being. I was proud that I had never had such of an allegation leveled against me, even as I sought to promote women and minorities into non-traditional jobs. End quote. These were the words of Clarence Thomas during his Senate hearing in 1991, facing sexual allegations made by Anita Hill. Unlike Larry Elder, who became the topic of discussion in my other speech commentary, dealing with tragic, misinterpreted black conservatism, Clarence Thomas is quite different, but shares the same commonality, a commonplace of the tragedy of rejection and the longing for white acceptance and the stamping of approval. But in the case of Clarence Thomas, it is more apparent that there is a struggle with this longing, as if there dwells a clear understanding of white supremacy, how it works, and why he should fight it, but chose to live with it under comfort, being silenced with the position of a Supreme Court justice title and status, and perhaps even being silenced by the memories of a grandfather who chastised him as a youth for showing signs of black empowerment leadership at an early age. Clarence would state how growing up in the 50s and 60s caused him to be influenced into the civil rights movement, idolizing the teachings of Malcolm X and other black nationalists. Thomas became extremely active and would have discussions about black liberation, but it was met with fierce resistance at home. This is how Clarence Thomas describes it. Quote, when I returned home, I was greeted with my grandfather, who told me that if I was going to do that, then I need to find another place to live. And so he kicked me out of the house and I was on my own. End quote. His grandfather would show him at an early age how standing up for the advancements of blacks who descended from American slaves can have severe consequences that can strip you out of resources, putting you in the middle of a disapproving American culture that can distribute punishment from people who are not always white. Sometimes it can be dealt by the hands of your own people. And as a young man who seemed to love his people so much in his youth, the love was not always reciprocated. The New Yorker would detail how his low status amongst his peers as a child left him at the mercy of taunts and bullying by other black children who gave him the nickname ABC, which stands for America's Blackest Child. And statements like, quote, if he were any blacker, he would be blue, end quote, would be recalled. Clarence Thomas's low status was given to him not because of anything that he ever did to anybody, but solely based off of his appearance, as it was explained in the book entitled Strange Justice, The Selling of Clarence Thomas. And it was explained that he had big lips, nappy hair, and was almost literally black. So it was other black children who used the features given to him through a genetic makeup passed down to him through his ancestors, physical traits that showed a strong biological connection to his black roots, using his physical appearance of healthy black DNA structure as a way to isolate him. Even through that, he still managed to become one of the most active black student union members that Holy Cross ever saw. And it was at this college where he gained a legacy as an activist. Clarence would recollect how his own brother would tell him that Clarence and all of his revolutionary comrades should all get together and go back to Africa and never return again. And finally, after graduating from Yale Law School, Clarence would solemnly articulate how he could not get a job and indirectly implies as if he was given no other options outside of starting his law career with the Republican law firm, when at that time he admitted to having a hatred for Republicans. Through all of his experience, however, Clarence Thomas's whole career is reduced to the sexual harassment allegations of Anita Hill, a black woman who would testify against him in front of a majority white male Senate hearing, with Joe Biden mitigating it as the chancellor. You can hear the pain in Clarence Thomas's voice as he read his statements, and you can feel the cringing tension in his short gaze, glaring down at his paper and then back up at the white man who he has to explain himself to on behalf of a black woman who he took a chance on hiring a decade prior. Regardless of what type of political party you hold, regardless of what type of political ideologies you share or whose side you take in this situation, anyone can clearly see that it was a moment of disgrace. And as a black man who spent his entire life trying to fight for black people, now has a black woman seeking some form of adjudication from white men in order to strip him from his position of authority. Martin Luther King was stabbed by a black woman, but that did not make him turn his back on his people. Marcus Garvey was clowned for being really dark with strong black features as well, and he still led one of the most historic Pan-African movements that we ever saw. But everybody's not built the same, and everybody is not as strong and should not be expected to be as strong and should not be expected to handle such turbulent handlings of their livelihoods with such grace. And Clarence Thomas becomes a tragedy in this way because a man who has so much potential to bringing back the essence of true black conservatism in the same framework of the likes of Frederick Douglass, and continuing the legacy of Adam Clayton Powell and Thurgood Marshall, allowed himself to be overwhelmed by persecution. I cannot think of another person who dealt with this as much of it as the man who I speak of in this video, because he never got a break from it. Malcolm X, who Clarence idolized, was lucky enough to have people in prison and the Nation of Islam to confide with. Even during X's worst time of persecution, when his home was getting firebombed, X was fortunate enough to have support from consistent followers and friends who gave him the cushioning needed during those rocky times of despair. Martin Luther King had the goodwill. Martin Luther King had the goodwill blessings of his father, whose church King would apprentice under. But Clarence Thomas had it the worst, rejected by his own family, rejected by his peers, rejected by society, rejected by history, and rejected of his dignity. A man so brilliant, with so much of a hard work ethic, with attention to detail, as explained, inspiring others who work under him to have precision and uncanny perfection. A black man like this has to know what he is doing when he decides to rule against the standards of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 in Byron Allen versus Comcast, a court case putting a piece of legislation passed into law by Republicans during the Reconstruction era to protect black business endeavors from racist discrimination practices, making it a crime to exclude black people from doing business in this country. One of the very few laws that specify black people by that classification, and making it clear that excluding us will not be tolerated. Clarence Thomas's black revolutionary side would have been historic in this situation, and it is strange how a Supreme Court justice with a reputation of being so precise in his law practices would side with white liberal justices and white conservative justices in the Supreme Court to rule in the favor of Comcast, who would interpret that law to mean that it is not illegal to exclude Byron Allen based on race if the exclusion is not proven to be 100% discriminatory, which means that it is perfectly fine to discriminate 99%. Now, does that make any sense at all? Of course not. So why would such of a quote-unquote constitutionalist like Clarence Thomas agree to something so ridiculous? Well, that is a tragedy. That law did not have a chance, even if Thomas would have been the only person voting for it, because he would have gotten outnumbered, and that proves the tragedy even more. Clarence did not even want to go down in history, even if it would have only been symbolic, for defending a conservative Republican piece of legislation created to protect black business owners like himself from the same white supremacy that he spoke out against many years earlier. Clarence has an old score to settle, and he is single-handedly helping with the digress of black political progress that was set by our ancestors because of his own personal issues with black people. This is the type of tragedy that some might even side with him on, only because this type of pressure that he received would have broken most of us. There is no excuse for selling out your own people, but damn, if Judas had a backstory like Clarence's, most of you would start asking, what would Judas do? Clarence Thomas received a level of COINTELPRO that acted out when he was a youth, infiltrating his own family. Somebody saw the potential of that young black child and started working on him immediately. And we must accept the fact that we helped with the damage and must now recognize that he is now in a very powerful position. White supremacy understood the psychology of this man, so they engineered his persecution only to exploit his pain, using him to do their bidding as an act of vengeance against us. There are many Clarence Thomases walking around, and God forbid if they ever land another seat in the Supreme Court. The only thing that we can do at this point is to reach out to our brother, empathize with his pain, show humility to his position, and hope that he is humble enough to do the same and perhaps forgive his people like we should forgive him, so we can form a unity for our people and not let personal gripes separate us from obtaining liberty and the repairing of damage that's needed, just like the black conservatives during the Reconstruction era laid out for us. And it is our job to continue it. This is presidential candidate Dion D. Jenkins, the only legitimate reparation presidential candidate, the only black agenda priority.